All right, everybody. Aloha Friday. This is the best day of the week, if you ask me, especially since I'm going to be sharing this space with Janine. We're going to be talking about a lot of things that a lot of people shy away from. And it's going to get hot today, so I hope you got your sunscreen. Psychological safety. We're going to be talking about fear, standing your ground, and moving on, because we all know that day will come to us all. Janine, Aloha Friday to you, and welcome to the show. Thank you for being with us.
Aloha, Enrique. I'm so glad to be here with you.
I'm excited about this conversation, not only because I have Janine here, but because this is something that a lot of people are wondering on a day-to-day basis. How do you deal with these specific topics? How do you navigate it, especially in the financial state that we are in as a nation, but as households? Not
Yeah,
everybody prepares for shifts. Not everybody prepares for what ifs.
right.
And so I'm excited about this. But Janine, take some time. Tell us a little bit about you so the audience can get to know you.
Great. So I'm Janine Hamner Holman. I am calling in or videoing in from Southern California. I live in Altadena, which is just above Pasadena, just outside of Los Angeles. And what I do is what's called organizational development work. So I work inside of organizations where people are not experiencing psychological safety usually, and we'll get into what that is in a second. But it's where things among the humans are not going as well as they might, and therefore people are not being their best selves. They're not able to bring their best selves to work, and therefore the organizations are suffering. And so I'm really all about creating a world in which everyone can thrive at work. And so that's what I've been up to through my company, which is called the J&J Consulting Group.
Outstanding. Now, folks, we're going to be diving into these things, but I first want to acknowledge those that are coming in. Shelly, thank you. Ion, I see you in there. And for all those that are joining us, whether you're joining on LinkedIn, Parade Deck, YouTube, or Facebook, welcome to the show today. I hope this information is enlightening for you. And if you are a leader and you don't need it right now, just know that somebody is. And so you'll need to equip yourself with some of this information, even if it's not for you, and it will be a benefit to your team. So, Janine, thank you for all the work that you do in the organizational space. I know that a lot of people are not as welcoming to people that will come in and kind of upheave their standards.
Right?
But when you're in front of the tree, you can't see the forest, right? It's just that's the way it is. And
It's
for a
right.
lot of the issues that come up in organizations, the leaders are too close.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that thread that you put down around, if it's not for you, it may be for somebody on your team. So here's one of the realities of the world that we are now living in. I want to give you two different contexts for this. So the first is that 3.5 years ago, is that right? No, almost exactly 3 years ago, when the COVID pandemic started. I would say that sort of most people in the workplace were at a state where sort of normal was somewhere around mid chest high. And then something would happen, and your tension would go up, your concern would go up, you might get a little pissed off, and then it would come back down to baseline somewhere around mid chest high. The problem is that we have now been living in this sea of uncertainty. And regardless of whether what you're looking at is COVID, or whether what you're looking at is economics, or whether what you're looking at is supply chain, or whether what you're looking at is the competition around talent and getting the best people in your organization, we are in this place of unending uncertainty and sort of constant change and upheaval. And what has happened is that baseline now for most people is somewhere around your mid forehead. And so something happens, one thing happens, and we're underwater. And it's why it's felt for many people like, I feel like I can't say anything, or I feel like I can't do anything, or I feel like, my people are on a hair trigger. It's because they are. And here's the thing, you are too. You may not be aware of it, but the human brain, the thing that the human brain hates more than anything is uncertainty. It's the reason that we will pick a fight with somebody just to get the outcome that we don't want, but because it creates certainty. And so, because this is the condition that we're all in, we all get to A, acknowledge it and realize it, and B, start figuring out tactics and strategies to help us all cope better. The other thing is, I was looking at statistics the other day that the Center for Disease Control had put out, and what they were looking at was rates of anxiety and depression. And not just like I'm a little bit anxious or I'm a little bummed out, but like clinical anxiety and depression. And pre-COVID, about a quarter of all people were clinically depressed and needed to be treated, needed to be on medication, or needed to have talk therapy or some other kinds of support. A third of all people were dealing with anxiety at a level where they needed help or support or intervention of some kind. The numbers have skyrocketed today. And it is now 2/3 of people, little more than 2/3 of people are dealing with anxiety at a level that we need help. We need intervention. We need medicine. We need talk therapy. We need support of a different level. And half of people are clinically depressed at a level that we need help. And so these are really important realities for leaders to understand, is that even if you feel like you're managing yourself okay, you may or may not be. You may or may not be doing what Brene Brown calls chandeliering, which is taking what's going on inside of you and sort of spewing it out onto other people, as opposed to dealing with it here in your own domain. And whether you're managing well or not, it's really likely that your people are not. And so, one of the submissions that I'm on is to really begin normalizing the reality around mental health issues. If I fall down and I break my ankle or my elbow, I might feel like a klutz, but I'm not going to be embarrassed about it. Like, yep, I wiped out and I broke whatever it is that I broke. But if something is broken in here, if something is broken in our heart, or not in the muscle that is in our heart, but in how we're able to cope, or in our head with our brain chemistry, or managing our feelings or our emotions, we get to understand that that's a normal part of life, just like falling down and breaking your elbow. And when we can normalize it and get it out in the open, then we can talk about it. And then we can together work to figure out answers. So that's a long picking up on a thread that you started, but I feel like it's an important context to set for this conversation.
No, and it truly is. It truly is. If you're a leader and you're not considering these things, that the possibility of you running into somebody, there's a 50-50 chance.
Right.
Right.
If it's not you, it's probably them.
Right. And so if you don't know that, and before the stats were lower, so it wasn't as common, and you could easily pick out a person that was broken either in spirit or in thought, or or just overall.
Right.
But now there's so many that my fear is that leaders start to normalize the broken.
Right.
And
Right.
so when you start to normalize the broken, then you don't address it.
Right.
You just let it ride because it's
You
normal.
become, yeah, you become the frog in the pot of boiling water.
Right.
We're all boiling and nobody's jumping out anymore.
Right. So it's important to discuss that. Thank you for bringing up that point and those stats. Leaders, if you're listening, and there's several on all these platforms that I'm looking on, it's important for you to be aware not only about you, but about those that you lead and the effects of both, right? Your effect on them and their effect on you. So you have
Right.
to know those things. So we're talking about psychological safety. This is the perfect segue for that realm of how does a leader ensure, number one, that they know what psychological safety is,
Right.
and we'll discuss that. But two, how do they ensure that they are creating that for their people and for themselves? The leaders tend to kind of like shortcut themselves for the sake of the people. That cannot happen, folks. You cannot, we hear it all the time. You can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
It is absolutely true. You'll be burnt out, and they'll keep going. Right?
Right. And the rates of burnout are astronomical. I was working with a client the other day, and we were talking about this phenomenon around burnout. And so I went to our friend Google and said, "Dear Google, how many books have been put out in the last year and a half on burnout?" And there's like 45 books that have come out in just the last 18 months on burnout. And part of it is because there's actually been a shift. It used to be that, thank you, Shelley, for that. So many of us are exhausted and burnt out, are on the verge of burning out. And so one of the big things that's happened is the World Health Organization has reclassified burnout from it being a personal problem, something that I need to deal with, I am burned out, to being an organizational issue. My company, my organization, my nonprofit, my school, my whatever it is burning me out. And so we need to deal with it at the level of organization, because there's things happening inside the organization that are chronic, that are leading to that burnout and those feelings of exhaustion that Shelley just posted about. Thank you. And so, and this is where psychological safety comes in. So psychological safety is a term that was coined by Amy Edmondson, who's a professor at the Harvard Business School. And really what it's about is understanding that not only is it a good idea for me to speak up, it is incumbent upon me. It is critical. I don't get to be a full member of the team unless I speak up. But here's the problem. Many of us don't speak up because either we're afraid or we've been taught by conditions inside the organization that if we speak up, we get slapped down. There are repercussions for us speaking up. The best example that I know of around this, so there's two actually, when Dr. Edmondson first started coming up with this idea, what she was looking at was medical institutions, hospitals, and the rates of people dying on the operating table. And what she found was that there was a direct correlation between psychological safety, people feeling and knowing that it was okay, it was important, it was good for them to speak up, and low rates of problems happening in the operating room. And so when nurses can say to a doctor, it's not good, but we all know it is, there's a big hierarchy in the world of medicine. And so if a nurse, someone lower on the status chart than a doctor, can say, excuse me, Mr. Doctor, ma'am doctor, you have left a sponge in this patient, or you didn't catch that thing, or we're supposed to be operating on the left knee and not the right knee, or whatever it is. If the person can speak up and say, we have a problem, and know that that's okay, know that that's what they're supposed to do, and there's not going to be a repercussion from it, they don't need to be afraid, then things go better. The best example I know of things not going well is NASA. One of the things that happened in the aftermath of the Challenger explosion back in the early 1980s was they realized that there were a lot of engineers who understood that the O-rings that they were putting on the space shuttle were going to fail, were not going to hold if things got very cold. And I don't know about y'all, but the one thing that I know about space is it's cold in space. And so the O-rings failed and the Challenger blew up and people lost their lives. And the space shuttle infrastructure and people's faith and confidence in NASA plummeted. And so, I mean, we can look to what happened with so many different companies and organizations. What happened to VW around the green technology that they were supposedly touting, and what was actually happening. It happens often, and sometimes the ramifications are incredibly high. And so our opportunity as leaders is to create an environment where people know, A, human beings make mistakes. We screw things up. That's just the reality of being human. And when we can normalize that and say, yeah, you're going to make mistakes. Try not to make the same mistake twice. Try to learn from it. And what we are is an organization that learns. Then you've got the conditions, you've got sort of the baseline for the beginning of psychological safety. Here's the reality. All human beings fundamentally need three things. We need to feel safe. We need to feel like we belong. And we need to have dignity. We need to feel that we are respected. Psychological safety creates that inside of organizations. And that's why it's so important. We can't make good decisions as organizational leaders if we're not getting the full information from the front line. And we don't get the full information from the front line when people know it's risky to tell the truth. If I say something that my boss doesn't like, I'm going to get in trouble or maybe even fired. That is the opposite of psychological safety. That is psychologically unsafe. And unfortunately, that's the reality in a lot of organizations, which is why Enrique felt like it was really important that we talk about this today. So thank you.
And Shelley kind of echoed this before, that there's so much risk in speaking up because of all the things that are at play and voicing those concerns. That, the fact is that leadership is a choice. Now, if you got pushed into leadership and you don't want to be there, by all means, don't call yourself a leader. I would probably applaud you for that.
Right.
Because at least you're honest. But if you are there by choice, these are the things that allow you to flourish as a leader. Creating a place where your people can thrive is definitely voided of these coercive attempts at people kind of like agreeing with what you need to say.
Right.
Because that's, if you ask me, dictatorship. Right. So and then that's how we got into that. But folks, if you are working in a place that does not foster or even attempts their hand at psychological safety, you might want to consider Probably the latter thing we're going to talk about in this conversation. So keep that in the tabs of the book, because no one could ever thrive. As a matter of fact, you may actually get physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually worse the longer you stay in those environments, right?
Yep, happened to
Janine,
me.
raise a hand.
Happened to me.
Right? And it does. It happened to me as well. I tell you, it took 7 months for me to decide. And not only 7 months for me to decide, I got to a point where I just couldn't do it anymore. But I asked my wife for permission to go. And I said, I picked up that phone. I said, baby, I don't know how much. She goes, come home.
Yeah.
And
Good for her.
look, I want to cry
Absolutely.
because to have that type and level of support at home is so vital. We're talking about leaders at work. How about leaders at home?
Yeah.
Are you the wife and the husband that your people, your wife, your husband need
Yeah.
in those times that you need to go? And so thankful to God that I have that. Bless her, and I love her to death. Shelly says toxic culture thrive on toxicity. Yeah, it doesn't get better. It actually does get worse. But I'm hoping that as we're talking about leadership at home, that's in place for your sake. But if it's not, that's something you don't get help with. But
Yeah.
at work, if you're not having that, it may be time to consider how you're setting yourself up for a potential pivot and shift out of that, because the longer you sit in it, the worse. Now, we talked about psychological safety, but there's this aspect of fear.
Yeah.
And we were just saying, what if I speak up?
Right.
What happens then? And as I talk to a lot of leaders, what I try to dive into is, what is your availability to make a shift?
Yeah.
And it's usually around finances,
Yep. It's almost always around
right?
finances. Yep.
Yeah, because if I had enough money and I don't take it, and to be honest, that was my position. I really loved that job
Right.
and the people.
Yeah.
I just could not bear the the toxicity of my bosses, and how they were playing out leadership. And then as a person that teaches leadership, it's like, come on, bro. But
Come on,
anyway,
people.
come on,
Right.
people. Yeah. But anyway, because I had the financial background and backing, that decision was made a little easier.
Right.
So let's talk about this fear that just it grips you.
It does grip you. And so my story was, I didn't even realize how bad it was. That's not entirely true. I knew I was having a hard time managing. I thought it was me. I did not have this construct yet that there was something that was amiss in the organization. I thought I was the problem. I was not handling the stress well. And so I went to my doctor and I said, I think I need to go on antidepressants. And we talked in his office for less than 5 minutes. And he said, I can tell. Here's what's happening. You are pulling from your adrenal gland because women don't have testosterone. And so, or we have a teeny amount. What I was doing was I was pulling from my adrenal gland in order to manage in this toxic environment in which I found myself. And I'd been doing it for years. And the problem was I was on the verge of adrenal burnout. So not only was I emotionally battered and emotionally having a hard time dealing, I was also physically having a hard time dealing, and I didn't even know it. He sent me out on immediate medical leave, and my response to that was, when he said, I'm sending you out on immediate medical leave, I said, well, can I think about it? And he said, if I told you you had cancer, would your response be, can I think about it? And I said, well, no, but I need to think about it, because it was such a mind shift for me that I've since learned it wasn't me. I was not the problem. And dealing with these circumstances was taking a toll on me that I had not yet realized. And so I left, and the way that medical leave works is a doctor cannot send you out on leave unless you are sitting right in front of them. So then I had to come back. I had to make another appointment and come back the next day because he knew I was in a state of crisis of which I was not aware. And so I came back in, and he sent me out on medical leave. I ended up being out for 6 months. And really, it took me another year and a half to put myself physically and emotionally back together again. That toxicity is such a permeating thing. And what it does is it breaks down our sense of self. It breaks down our feeling that we have dignity. It takes away our dignity. It takes away our safety. It certainly takes away our feeling of belonging. We don't want to belong there, and we don't. And we can get stuck in fear. And so, and there's a difference between toxicity and just some stuff's not great. If you realize you are in a place that is toxic, you have a manager who is toxic, you have an organizational systems and structures that allow or even thrive on toxicity, you're in a dog eat dog organization. What we get to do at that point is, in fact, leave. And I would certainly advise getting your ducks in a row before you leave. But here's one of the things that shows my age, is that my idea is I have to have my ducks in a row before I leave. One of the reasons that we are still in this great resignation, great transition, great reshuffling, whatever we want to call it, is because younger generations, the millennials and the Gen Zs who are coming up behind them, they don't have that same frame. Their concept is essentially, I will not take this anymore. This does not work for me, and I'm out of here. And because they haven't stuck around in the toxicity, they don't have damage to their sense of self. They don't have damage to their dignity and feeling of being able to contribute, and their understanding of safety. Their safety is based on themselves. And so their idea is, I can leave, I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to create a side hustle, or I'm going to know that there is fear, and I'm going to do it anyway. That's the definition of bravery, is understanding that there's something here that, really it would be legitimate to be worried about. I got some fear going on, and I'm going to do it anyway because it's important.
I love that. When companies stopped providing retirement,
Yeah,
I
right?
said that's the end of that.
Went away. Yep.
Pensions went away. I said that's the end of that, because there's no incentive.
Yep.
Other than you showing up and getting a bonus or something, right? That you could go get somewhere else. Right. But what I love, and as we're talking about fear, is that and you can complain all you want about this generation, because the fact is, we raised them.
That's right. They are my kids.
So if you want to complain about anything, complain about yourself. Yep. Because they are a product of us. So for all the millennials, I got your back. Because the fact is, every generation is going to complain about the next one.
Yep.
Not realizing that they're a product of them. Yep. And that's the first failure of leadership. You not realizing that you just created whatever it is that you're looking at. But when you're talking about fear, um, whether it's this generation, fear has always been around. It will always be around as long as we're on this earth somehow, and we will always have to contend with that.
Yep.
What I like about this generation coming up is that they're not afraid of what if.
Yeah.
They're not. If this don't work, guess what? I'm gonna go try something else.
Yep.
The jeopardy there for companies and organizations is that you can't keep people if you messing up.
That's right.
And so what we saw as what they call the great, everything was the great. Goodness.
Right.
It was just an exodus. People got tired, right? They got tired of the mess and said, you know what? That's it. I'm gonna deal with this.
Yep.
I'll go home. Most millennials have not moved out. They're still around.
Yep.
The home with their parents and stuff. Yep. And they're wise. You know, I applaud them. A lot of people, when I grew up in a generation where they were like, yo, 18, and you got to learn how to do something.
That's right. Out my house.
I'm not like that. I'm like, yo, hold up. I'd rather you get your stuff right.
Yeah.
Before you go out there, because you talk about doggy dog. It ain't easy.
Yeah.
And my daughter will tell you, she's 26. She's happy at home. And and I'm sure that there's some things, right? Come on, you want to have some space or whatever. So I gave her the whole West Wing over there. You go do you. But as a responsible parent, there are some things that I would like for her to get more of,
right?
Prior to doing that. So anyhow, there is less of a fear of leaving your job. Right. I wasn't afraid, but then I had the backing.
Right.
So when it comes to fear, you'll have to make a choice anyway.
Yep.
Right. And I love what you said. They say, hey, we're going to do it afraid anyway.
Yep.
Whatever.
Fear
just
just
go.
Is.
We'll figure it out. And so right? I love that. Now, Shelly put a big thing here. So I've learned over the years to create healthy boundaries so that toxicity does not permeate my home life as well. That's and we kind of talked about that.
Shelly. That's
do
great.
You have that person at home where you can come and say, baby, this going on. Can we talk about it? I kind of like at my wit's end, and it's so important to do that. So fear is something you'll have to deal with. If you need help, there are a lot of resources and there are a lot of people, but I hope you have one in your inner circle. For those listening, if you have not comprised that inner circle, that is, your go-to team, your A team, whatever you call that, please start developing those relationships where you could say, hey, can we agree that if something, I'm going through something at work, that I can come in and we can, you can give me some honest feedback or some, pray with me, do something.
Right. Poor baby, like whatever it is that's going to help. Right.
Right. Yeah. Get my mind clear, because as we're talking about fear, fight or flight will come up.
Powerful.
Right. Fight or flight will come up. Here we are at this junction where we're talking about standing your ground. And you folks, if you cannot stand for yourself, there's nobody, because as much as I love you and I will stand up for you in a cause, I can't take your banner to the mountaintop.
Right. And I can't want it more than you do.
Exactly. So as much as you will have champions around you, right? And folks that will support you, you have to put that flag somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's got to come from you. So let's talk about standing your ground, because, it could get contentious. And I'm from the Bronx, New York City. It don't take that long to get into something like that. So how do we begin to structure a stand my ground, philosophy, mentality, approach to maybe a place that does not have psychological safety and is, spewing fear to its members.
Yeah. So, so if you are in a place that does not have psychological safety, that is spewing fear, your opportunity is to make a plan to move out, whether it is I'm moving out tomorrow or I'm moving out as soon as I can get it in place. What Dr. Michelle just put up there is exactly the key. It is boundaries. So that is the key to standing our ground, is getting really clear within ourselves what's okay with me and what is not okay. And one of the things that I often have people and organizations do is get really clear on their values. So one of my values is accountability. And so what that looks like for me is if I mess up, I will say, I screwed this up. And I had a day where I realized I had made a $20 million mistake. Like, that's just not a whoopsie. That's a I could get fired for it. And of course, because I'm human, I went into fear. I went into fight, flight, or freeze. My first thought was I have to cover it up somehow. But that's not what accountability is. And so I ended up going to my boss and saying, boss, I've made a really big mistake and I'm completely freaking out. I don't know what to do. And because of how I was owning it, he got into my rickety little boat with me and started helping me paddle to a solution. He was not that guy, though. He was not the please bring me all of your problems guy. He had one of those big circles with a line through it on his door that said no drama. So I was coming to him with some big old drama. I made a $20 million mistake. And because of how I was owning it, because of my value of accountability, he got into that boat with me. And so it's really about figuring out. So if my value is respect and mutual respect, then I'm going to respect you and I am going to stand for you respecting me. And so when I feel disrespected, again, human beings need three things: safety, belonging, dignity. And dignity is all about respect. And so when I am feeling disrespected, I'm going to stand my ground and I'm going to say, it does not work for me when you speak that way to me. I hear that as disrespect and I get shut down. I can't be my best self. So I get it that you're frustrated. I get it that you're concerned. I get it that you're worried. I get it that I blew a deadline, whatever the reality is. I get it that there's a problem. And you coming at me that way doesn't work. And yes, it takes a village. And this idea of it taking a village, especially at work, is critically important. There have been all of these different studies that say if you have a best friend at work, and I'm putting that in air quotes because this idea of best friend at work isn't necessarily like your best friend, your ride or die, but it's a best friend at work. It's somebody that you can come to at work who you feel like has got your back, or at the very least is going to hold the bucket while you spew out all the stuff you need to get out. And they're going to hold that bucket as a safe place for you. And I want to come back just for a second on that idea of what happened when organizations took away retirement, took away pensions. The big antidote to that is psychological safety, because when you create the conditions where people feel safe at work, where people know that they belong, where people know that they can speak up, they have agency, they have dignity, they will stick around. So they're not sticking around because of the benefits package, because they're going to get a pension. They're sticking around because, and this is the number one thing that matters to millennials and the Gen Zs who are coming up after them, they feel honored, they feel connected, their work matters, they understand how it connects into something bigger than themselves when we have psychological safety at work. And so if you're having issues around turnover, if you're having issues around getting the right talent into your organization, recruiting the right people, you want to look at, do I have the conditions here? Am I building a high trust organization? Do I have the conditions here for psychological safety? Because that's the biggest thing that people are looking for. I just had a conversation yesterday with the folks at Great Place to Work, and they were talking about how high trust organizations is the number one thing that people are looking for today in the workplace. And a high trust organization is an organization that has psychological safety. And so if you are a leader out there thinking like, okay, well, this all sounds great, but I'm still dealing with some problems. I still have some toxicity in my organization. My organization isn't toxic, but like I've got a pinky over here that's a problem. Here's the thing. I get calls not infrequently from CEOs who say some version of, Janine, we really care about X. We really care about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. For instance, we really care about uplifting women. We really care about, whatever the values are. And we have this one person, unfortunately, it's usually a guy, but this one person who is a leftover from the old age, and they just won't get on board. And we've sent them to, trainings or sensitivity trainings or teachings on cultural sensitivity or, whatever it is. And they just won't get on board. We've done all the things that we can do, and I just don't know what to do anymore because this guy is also a rainmaker. And I say, okay, so here's the thing. This is actually an easy problem. It's not going to feel good, but it's very easy. You only have two things that you can do. Either you let that guy go because he is not in line with what your organization stands for anymore, or you don't. And if you don't, then you've got to understand, then we cannot say that those are our values anymore. And it doesn't have to be a big moral thing. I mean, it might be, but it doesn't have to be a big moral thing. It can just be, okay, well, those aren't our values. So then what are our values? Our values are around making money. Our values are around these other things. But we can't say we are about our people thriving if as leaders we are willing to continue to let toxicity happen.
And I love that. If there's any honesty we need, is the ones from up top.
Yep.
Because guess what? Everybody sees it. They see what you post on the wall in a nice little plaque.
Yeah.
And they know what you do on a day-to-day. And they will tell you whether it matches or not. And if it doesn't match, you might as well take that thing down.
Absolutely. And actually, you should take it down because, those big, like, we're all about teamwork. We're all about family. We're all about trust. We're all about, whatever it is. If you're not walking that talk, every time your employees see that thing, it further erodes in them a feeling of connection to the organization, a feeling of, well, obviously, mostly what we are here is bullshit because we say one thing and we do another.
Yeah.
And they will leave on the head of that.
I'll tell you, we're going to be transitioning here to they will leave because I know I left.
I
left, right? So it's going to happen whether you do it voluntarily or voluntold. It doesn't matter. One day will come and you'll have to transition out of that thing. And so how are we preparing for that is the key to how easier it becomes. Right. And so if you're not calculating that into your strategy, then maybe your strategy needs to be addressed And there are a couple of things right here. See, Dr. Michelle said the corn. That's right. That's right. And Shelley said, yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Um, uh, the thing is that we will have to somehow, some way strategize around a move. If you're not ready for that and you're just waiting for that time to come, you will be behind the curve. Instead of owning the decision, you will be a product of a forced decision. And no one ever wants to be a product of a forced decision because it may not be what you wanted.
And the longer we sit in conditions that are toxic, the more toll it's taking on us. So probably you made a decision to leave your organization faster than I did. It took you 7 months. It took me really 2 years to put myself back
Yeah.
together again. And if I could do it all over, I would do it differently. That was a lot of pain and struggle and strife to put myself back together, to feel like a whole human being who had something to offer. That's a bad, dark place to be. And so if you are realizing that you are in that place, it is time to make a move before it takes more of a toll on yourself than you're willing to pay.
Yeah, and pay attention to yourself, folks. As a leader, that happened to me. I did get into, and I was fortunate to get into an organization right after that. Unfortunately, it was the height of COVID. My mom got COVID. She passed away from it,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
all at the same, and kind of like boom, boom, boom.
Right? That's a
I could
lot.
not operate fully for this company. I decided to leave that for their sake.
Yeah.
I needed the space. I did, and I did take that for myself, but for their sake, sooner than later, right? Because I did not want them to get drug into that, and let them go and prosper, and prosper they did. So pay attention to yourself.
And people, that's what honor looks like. So Enrique made a choice that he was not able to bring his best self to work because of conditions that were happening in his life, and he stepped back, right? And so the organization got to continue, got to get somebody who was more functional, while Enrique took the time that he needed to mourn the loss of his mother and be with himself in a way that was critically important at that time. That's what honor looks like.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. No, and and I encourage leaders to make those decisions. Now, granted, I did say I was in a position that I could make a
Right.
lot of decisions, but that's where you need to put yourself. Don't get hung up on things that may force you to do things. Handle that. Get that stability, whatever that looks like, so that you can be the best you can for whoever. So
Yeah.
now we're moving on because this thing has just got too crazy. And so
Right.
how did that move look for you?
So um, I was able to, because I was sent out on medical leave, I had disability checks that were coming in from the state for 6 months while I was out on medical leave. And then once I was able to return to work, my first thought actually was I was going to go back to that organization, right? Because that's how I grew up. That's what you do. You put yourself back together, and then back into the trenches you go. And thankfully, I had people in my life who said, "What the hell are you thinking? No, you cannot do that." And so I ended up uh, leaving, resigning, and then going to work for a friend actually who had started her own business. And part of what was great about that is that so she was generating more business than she could do, and so she needed some help. And because she was a friend, actually, in the vernacular of when we were five, she was my best friend. I was able to continue putting myself back together again while working. And so I had the opposite experience of Enrique. I knew I wasn't fully put together, and this was a soft place for me to land. And so if you find yourself in a place where you realize like, oh, I am broken in a way, and we often think of broken as pejorative, as bad. No, sometimes we just break. Like I fell down and I broke my ankle. Sometimes we just break. And so if you realize that you are broken, A, look into medical leave, because that can give you that cushion that you need to start putting yourself back together again. And then also look for places where you could go to work and you don't have to necessarily be your normal 100%. So that might look like you get a job driving for a ride share. You might bag groceries. You might, work at Starbucks as a barista. You might, do something that is, you might, write copy for somebody so that you are working from home. There's so many, we are in this gig economy where there's so many ways that people can use their talents, go on TaskRabbit, and I will be your handy person if that's your jam. We can figure out ways to get revenue in the door so that we have food and shelter, so that we have safety. And while we continue to put ourselves back together again, so that then we can figure out what is the next thing that I want to do. For me, I realized I had actually been on a mission my whole life that I wasn't aware of, to create a world in which people could thrive at work. And so I decided that what was next for me was to start my own business. And I mean, that's one of the great things, again, about these kids that we raised, the millennials and the Gen Zs. Most of them, like 80% of them, assume that at some point in their life, they will start their own company. And many of them are doing it. And, the thing about having your own company is sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I've now been in business for almost 7 years. I am past that point of like, is it going to work or not? Most businesses fail in the first 2 years. And if you can get past year 5, you're pretty certain you're going to be doing it. So, and many of our younger folk, they may start things, it may go for a little while, that they decide that's not their jam, or that's not working, that configuration the way that they created it first, and then they recreate it differently or go try something else. And so, if you are finding that you are in a place where this is just not going to work, it is time to move on, then figure out what is that going to look like for you. There's a great book that has been out for 100 years called What Color is My Parachute? That's really looking at what are my greatest skills and talents, and how do those work well in the workplace. And I'm sure now it's online, and I'm sure now there's many other sorts of things where you can figure out what are the things that I love to do, and what kind of job, either a gig job or a job, could I get doing that? Because the more that, and again, this is one of the key things that our younger folks in the workplace care about, having work that is meaningful, whatever that looks like for you, is the biggest thing that's going to keep you excited to get up every day and go after it. And so what's meaningful right now doesn't have to be what's going to be meaningful for you in 20 years. I've had 3 separate, very distinct careers over my lifetime. And I think with the younger generations, they're going to have even more than that. And that's great.
Yeah, and a variety helps and colors your life. So,
Right? It's the spice of life.
Yeah, and in a short list, at least you'll have a variety that be able to say, "Hey, I tried." And what I love about this generation, they're not afraid of trying.
Not at all.
You take older people and it's like, "Oh, but I've been doing this," and they're not as adventurous, and that's why they stay. But the years of fidelity to an organization, I believe, are gone now, unless you can provide psychological safety. If you can do that, you'll have people ride you to the end. They'll
End of
be with
time.
you. They will
Yep.
not go nowhere.
Their
Right?
kids are going to come to work for you, right? It's going to be, it's going to, it is the thing now
Right.
that is going to get people to be loyal to your organization. What it takes is you being loyal to them, you creating that psychological safety where they are jazzed up to come to work.
And Dr. Michelle says she's got a whole gang. She got her gang providing that for her, and that's wonderful. Shelly said the same about her husband that she can go to. Now, folks, look, we covered psychological safety, we covered fear, we covered standing your ground, and we just covered what if I have to go, right?
Yeah.
And these are important things to cover. I know a lot of people are not talking about it, but I tell you, it's happening. You go to any work site, you're going to be challenged with any one of these 4 things that we covered today. You'll have to be ready to make that decision for yourself, for your family, for your sanity, Lord, at least, right? Because what happens is that we sit under these leaders, these organizations, these climates, and unfortunately, the people who get hurt, it's not just you, because you're bringing that stuff to the house.
That's right.
And then your kids are wondering why you short, and your wife is wondering why you ain't talking, and they don't deserve it. And I'll tell you that right now. So, Shelly said this was such a great session. Thank you both. Thank you, Shelly, for being with us. Thank you, Dr. Michelle, and all those that joined us from either one of these social media platforms that we have streaming on live. Janine, if somebody wanted your help at their organization, they heard you, they said, "Oh, we love that info." How would they get a hold of you for that service?
So the best way to get a hold of me is actually through LinkedIn. I'm the only Janine Hamner Holman there. So find me on LinkedIn. You can also certainly feel free to email me. I am at Janine at jandjcg.com, which is my company. Janine at jandjcg as in consulting group.com. And it's been truly my honor and a joy and a blessing to be here with you today, Enrique.
Well, thank you for joining me, folks. This is the end of Aloha Friday Live. I want to remind you, if you didn't see this live, check it out on replay. There's a couple of other things. This month, I dubbed it. I took over May. That's all it is to it. And I made it. I'm celebrating every day. I'm celebrating 4 Latina leaders around the nation, around the world. Take a look at that every morning, 0800 Eastern time. I post. Take a look at those leaders. They're doing great things. Another thing is that I am striving for 500 on my YouTube channel. You can help by going there at DTLW Podcast on YouTube. Subscribe and help a brother out, I would say. But I would love your help. But today has all been about psychological safety, fear, standing your ground and moving. Janine, thank you for being with me. Mahalo to everybody that joined us today. We really appreciate you. And we will see each other again next week. Another great person doing great things. Aloha, everybody. Be blessed.